Thank you. So our conversation tonight is about our general conference. United Methodists, we get together from across the globe every 4 years to have what's known as a general conference, and ours actually started yesterday. The opening worship service was yesterday afternoon, and there's been some business going on today
Test one, two.
in regard to the general conference as well. I've got people here who've been United Methodists all their lives and who know General Conference inside out. I have people who've been United Methodists all their lives and haven't got a clue about General Conference at all. And I've got people who have never been United Methodist and who are here to find out what all this conversation is about around General Conference. We are very, very lucky at Memorial to have Jessica Barber Scott with us. Jessica is a member of the Florida Delegation. I'm going to let her introduce herself and just tell you a little bit about the journey that she's been on to get to this point. So go ahead, Jessica.
Sure thing. Thanks, Pastor Charlie. I actually I have been a lifelong Methodist. I have served as a conference lay delegate to our annual conference for going on 10 years now, in various roles, either as our church, as a representative of Memorial, as a representative of the district, as a representative of the entire conference. Currently, I serve as the district lay leader for the Northeast District, which means I serve in several different roles on the Conference Board of Laity. To get to be a member of the Florida Delegation, so I'm part of the delegation. I am not a General Conference delegate. I am a reserve delegate to General Conference, but a seated delegate at the jurisdictional conference, which I believe Pastor Charlie will talk a little bit more about that
I will.
shortly. So you'll understand what that means. But basically what it means is that I represent not just Memorial, not just the Northeast District, but the entire conference, Florida Annual Conference, at both general, if I'm called in, which very unlikely to be, or if or when I'm seated at the jurisdictional conference in Lake Junaluska in July. And so that path began in 2019 when I was elected by the Florida Annual Conference. This is what we have hilariously and sort of sadly referred to multiple times as the quadrennium that would not end, because this is the postponed 2020 General Conference, even though it's 2024. You won't know the reasons for that. So the delegation that is currently seated was voted on and elected in 2019. So we've been serving in this role that we thought we'd have for 4 years for 5. So it's been a lot, but it's exciting to finally be here. And when we talk a little bit about what's happened so far, I'll share a little bit more about the joy around finally being together. So,
All right, Jessica, thank you for that. And friends, I've said already we have a Q&A session at the end of our section tonight. So I'm going to ask, unless you really, really need to interrupt just the next few minutes of presentation, just hold your questions, write them down, bring them at the end, and then we'll use the hand up feature to get around everybody's questions before we finish tonight. Or if you need to, you can type in a question at any time. We'll respond to type-ins as well. And Carrie Mack, you'll keep an eye on those things for me as well. So I'm going to bring up a presentation that we put together just to help us through. And we have a couple of infographics that will really help us. So give us, again, just a thumbs up where you are if you can see the full screen presentation now. Excellent. That's what we wanted to know. So here we go. Let's see. So yeah, we are here and getting going with our general conference. And what is general conference? How does it fit into our structure? Again, some of you might know this. This might be total news to some of you as well. And so this was a helpful infographic that was put out by the Virginia Annual Conference just a few weeks back, just to help people understand what they are a part of. And so really up the top here, you're going to understand that everything starts with you. There is no United Methodist Church without you turning up and forming congregations. And so you are a committed leader or individual within your local church, faithfully participating in the life and ministries of your local congregation through your prayers, presence, gifts, service, and witness. Any of you who have become members recently will recognize those 5 words as familiar language that we say in our membership vows. Our local church then is part of a district. Jessica mentioned this already, that we are part of the Northeast District of the Florida Conference. The Florida Conference currently has 8 of those districts, and you can see them listed there on the screen. Our district, of course, is part of an annual conference, and so you'll often hear us refer to the Florida Annual Conference, of which we are a part. Memorial is one of 387 churches in the Florida Annual Conference, and you can read on there, the United States has 54 annual conferences supervised by bishops in 46 episcopal areas, and there are 75 annual conferences in Africa, Europe, and the Philippines, which are then supervised by 20 other bishops. So someone asked me the other day how many bishops we have. The answer is 66, just like books of the Bible. I never thought of that, actually. That's pretty cool. Anyway, moving on, our conference is then part of a jurisdiction. And we are a part of the Southeastern jurisdiction, as you can see on the United States map here. This is what Jessica is elected to serve in the Southeastern jurisdiction. Their job is to set jurisdictional budgets and to elect bishops for the conferences within that jurisdiction. And that's important work that they do. After that, we consider that we are not just an American church. The United Methodist Church is a worldwide church. And so outside of the U.S. annual conferences, we have these 7 central conferences. And together, all of us makes up the United Methodist Church. Again, structurally here, we're governed by 3 bodies. For all of us here as Americans, we understand sort of 3 branches. You can understand this in the same idea here. So we have 3 bodies. We have the Judicial Council, who listens to any complaints that are filed in regard to ecclesial life. Then we have the General Conference, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is at the minute in terms of setting policy and making any adjustments to discipline and setting budgets for each 4-year period. And then we have the Council of Bishops, who are the collection of 66 bishops and all retired bishops as well, who gather together and who really sort of take a leadership role in the life of our church. So as you can see down at the bottom here, General Conference sets policy. The General Conference meets every 4 years. Legislation is examined and voted upon by the persons elected from annual conferences from across the denomination. We call them delegates. The Council of Bishops presides over the General Conference and does not have a vote, and the Judicial Council then reviews past legislation to determine its constitutionality, legality, or meaning. That's what the work of General Conference is, down at the bottom there. Moving on and continuing just to understand the road to General Conference and how the Florida Delegation is made up. Jessica alluded to this already, and our delegates were elected by our annual conference in 2019. So all delegates to the General Conference are elected by annual conference members at their annual conference meetings every 4 years. And this happens in the summer prior to the General Conference. So Jessica was elected in 2019 for a conference that was supposed to take place in 2020. For COVID reasons, visa reasons after that, vaccination reasons, we are where we are, and the 2020 conference is now meeting in 2024. So a 2-year job has turned into a 5-year job, and we're thankful to Jessica and all the delegates for doing that. The number of delegates at each General Conference ranges from 600 to 1,000. This year, there are 862 delegates. Half of those are clergy, and half of those are laity. And as you can see at the bottom of this section here, we have 8 clergy and 8 lay delegates to the General Conference from Florida, plus 8 clergy and 8 laity elected to the Southeastern Jurisdictional Conference. And like we said, all of them were elected in 2019. So our Florida delegation has been meeting together since their election in 2019 to prepare for General Conference. These meetings were first in person, then they were virtually through the height of the pandemic, and then more latterly they have been in person again. Of course, we've said this already, that this is the 2020 General Conference, even though it's happening in 2024. Someone's going to ask me later, when is the 2024 conference going to take place? I'm not going to give you the answer to that because I don't know yet. So when we get that answer, we will pass it on to you for sure. Now, that General Conference itself, it's a 10-day meeting, started yesterday. It consists of several parts. Delegates are going to spend much of the first week meeting in committees, and Jessica will tell us a little bit more about some of Florida's representation and leadership of those committees when she comments later on. So the job of those committees is to review legislation, to make edits or changes before then passing it to the larger body for votes. And then delegates will participate in worship services and experiences. They'll engage in conversation. They'll dialogue with fellow delegates from across the world. And ultimately, they will be tasked then with voting on the legislation as it comes before the gathered body. And those sessions will take place next week. I think I'm correct on that. Jessica can correct me if I'm wrong. General Conference is taking place in Charlotte, North Carolina. There are the dates that you can see that it's taking place. And everything can be followed online. You can find those links by going to umc.org, and you'll find the streaming links there and also on social media. This is just a list of our clergy delegates here, and then I have our lay delegates as well. So these are all experienced clergy leaders within our conference who were all elected in 2019. And I'm not going to go through them one by one. I'll just give you a moment or two to see them. And our delegates are all have all been contactable through the delegation email address. So that is all of the clergy there, 8 of them. And then we have our 8 lay delegates here. We see a couple of faces in there maybe that are familiar. We know our friend Derek Scott, who is the director of CCW, Campus to City Wesley Foundation, our campus ministry here in Jacksonville. And then we have Carleen Fogel Miller, who is a member of Memorial, actually, and still is a member of our church, and she's a daughter of my predecessor, Beth Fogel Miller. We have our lay delegation. This is Matt and Rye. They are finishing off the 8 lay delegates to annual conference. All right, these are the 8 clergy delegates to the jurisdictional conference. Again, all experienced leaders within our conference and within local churches and ministry settings within our conference connection. And these are our 8 jurisdictional conference delegates. I want to just single out up here Rye, who was elected as a jurisdictional delegate, and then because of someone had to pull out of the originally elected General Conference delegation, Rye is now serving this week in the General Conference, who's called up to step in as one of those reserves there.
Well, I also want to point out Martha Gay Duncan we had another person step out. So she's actually the seated alternate right now too.
Okay, thanks. I did not know that. Every day's a school day, guys.
It changes every day.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. That's why we elect so many. And so these are the names of the reserves. Top are clergy, and then below we have our lay reserve delegates there as well. Okay, so coming back into the business, what does our General Conference do? General Conference, as we said, sets the official policy and is the voice of the denomination. That's a really important part of being a Methodist or Wesleyan or United Methodist, is that the voice of our church is the voice of the conference. So General Conference is the voice of the denomination. We meet every 4 years. We revise and amend the Book of Discipline and the Book of Resolutions and other official documents. And the General Conference also sets the quadrennial budget. So it sets a budget for 4 years. We'll come back to that a little bit later and tell you how things are going to be impacted by the happenings of recent years. So in terms of legislation, petitions with changes or additions to the Book of Discipline or the Book of Resolutions and other official documents, they are submitted during the years in between General Conference gatherings. And this legislation is what the delegates act upon at the General Conference. It comes before committee. Things are edited and amended in there before they come to the floor for their votes. Who writes this legislation or suggests these additions or changes? Anybody can submit a petition to General Conference. Some come from individuals, some come from groups of people, some are from official bodies or organizations within the church, and some even come from whole annual conferences. This legislation is submitted prior to General Conference, and is compiled for delegates into volumes of the Advanced Daily Christian Advocate for them to read and to review. The ADCA is translated into 4 languages: English, French, Portuguese, and Kiswahili. In terms of revisions, legislation is grouped by theme into one of 14 legislative committees. Each General Conference delegate serves on a single committee and spends the first several days in committee reading, having conversations about and revising what has been submitted. There are very often similar pieces of legislation that aim to do the same thing, and they can be selected, combined, and or revised before passing them forward to the floor. And each day, General Conference delegates receive updated legislation that has moved from committee on to the full body. This is a fast overview of what is going on right this week, but hopefully giving you a good illustration of the work that's taking place at our General Conference. And so then next week, there will be the plenary sessions, and that is where the full body of the General Conference meets together for worship, for dialogue, for holy conferencing, for voting, and it's in these full plenary sessions where votes are taken on petitions and resolutions. As you can see there, each General Conference delegate votes on legislation brought before the body, and most legislation only requires a majority vote at the General Conference. But if any constitutional changes are to be made, it requires both a 2/3 vote by the General Conference and a 2/3 aggregate vote of lay and clergy members in annual conferences. All that is to say, let me just highlight this because I think it's real important. All that is to say that this part here means that changes to the constitution of our church, they have to be voted by a broad majority across our annual conferences throughout the world if those changes are to be made. And that's just important because some of the things that we'll talk about in a few minutes, one of them is a change to the constitution of our church. And so it takes a broad swathe of agreement across the globe to get this change made. Let me just, there we go. And so after the General Conference, as long as any constitutional changes are agreed by the annual conferences, then the Book of Discipline, the Book of Resolutions, they are all revised and updated, and other documents as approved by the General Conference are updated with the revisions as well. And any legislation that has passed all the way through usually becomes effective the following January 1st. So changes that come into that are voted on at this General Conference here in May generally will not become effective until January 1st of the following year. As you can see there, constitutional amendments passed by 2/3 of the General Conference are then sent on to the annual conferences for voting. Those elected to attend annual conference from their church or district will cast a vote. And once all of the annual conferences from across the connection, that is across the globe, have voted, if 2/3 of the total votes cast are in favor, that legislation becomes official. I hope all of that is understandable for you all. If it's not, write down questions and we'll come back to them later at the end of the session. Okay, so we have some main issues that will come online for conversation at this General Conference here. And these have become known in recent weeks as the 3 R's. And these are a set of proposals being put forward with a broad sense of agreement at some changes to our Constitution and to our social principles, and then, of course, to the language of our discipline as well. I'm going to invite Jessica to speak to some of these, and I have some slides here. And Jessica is much more up to speed on these than I am, just because of her proximity to the delegation and the conversations that she's been a part of for these last 4 or 5 years. So, Jessica, are you happy to lead us through a little bit on this?
Sure, absolutely happy to do
Thanks.
that. So we'll start with regionalization. This is something that Pastor Charlie talked about, that 2/3 that you have to have for amendments and things like that. For regionalization, oh my gosh, I just lost all the words I was about to say. Let me back up. Regionalization. What this means is there's a plan that was submitted by it was kind of a coalition of of people from all over, right? It wasn't just US, it wasn't just Europe, it wasn't just one central conference. It's actually quite a large group of coalition leaders or coalition. And the idea is that rather than, so we are a global church. We started as an American church. And because of our history, there's some colonialism in there, but there's also just the way we expanded. Methodism has grown quite a bit since 1784, and so we are present on in so many different places in so many different contexts. And today, I was telling Pastor Charlie today, the committee on the Book of Discipline presented a regionalization and as what it would be, what it would mean for the church as a whole. And essentially, it does break us up. But we would still be a part of a global church, but it allows a little more self-determination and self-governance, right? So what works here in the United States doesn't necessarily translate and work in Africa. It doesn't work in the Philippines. What works in Europe, in Germany, doesn't necessarily work in Korea. It doesn't work quite that way anymore. But our Book of Discipline still has us very American, very US centric. So because this is not a US centric church anymore, this is a worldwide church. The idea is that we would regionalize. So there's a little more here about telling you exactly what it would mean. It would essentially take there's the 7 central conferences: Africa, Europe, Philippines, and the United States, and we would have the same authority to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline, rather than, so we'd have a general Book of Discipline, and then we'd have portions that we would be able to make work for our context, if that makes sense. So that's regionalization. That does require at least 2/3 vote from the General Conference, and then the 2/3 vote on the Annual Conference, because it would change our doctrine, not our doctrine, but our Book of Discipline. Constitution. Thank you. Okay, we can keep moving. The revised social principles. So I actually had Garrett bring them into me. These are the revised social principles. You can see here the revised social principles of 2020. We got these at the very last in-person meeting before we all went home for COVID isolation in January of 2020. So these have been waiting for a while. Essentially, this goes through the United Methodist Board of Church and Society. And this is what we look to remove some language to help update, especially around human sexuality. The idea is that we want to make things easier. So this is much easier to read than the Book of Discipline, which is this. I don't have mine handy, but it's this, right? So it makes it much easier. We just want to update this. We want to revise this, remove some harmful language, which we'll get into a little more there, but essentially making it more globally relevant, theologically founded, and succinct. So easier. And then the removal of exclusionary language is the third piece. So that's 3 R's. And essentially, we want to remove exclusionary language. This would bring the Book of Discipline and bring our language to a neutral place. It would not say you had to do something, and it would not say you had to not do something. The idea is we just remove language that was added in 1972. So it hasn't been around that long, just a little over 50 years. So we're just looking at this going, okay, how can we bring this to a neutral place that makes more sense in a global context for where we are today? So those are the 3 R's. You'll see that floating around if you've been watching anything come through the United Methodist News Service, if you've been seeing things online. I'm certain if you've been on social media, you've seen some of these things around the 3 R's. Those are the 3 R's. Those are the really big focus areas for this General Conference. There are other things that are happening as well, budgets, things like that, which we'll get into some budget stuff in a little bit. But those are the three main areas of focus.
Thanks for that, Jessica.
Yeah.
So we said also with General Conference, a main part of our work is the setting of the quadrennial budget, and so this is the budget that really sort of aligns all of the work of the United Methodist Church, of its sort of central offices and its Episcopal offices across all of those central conferences and our own conferences here in the United States as well. This is just a slide that I pulled from social media earlier today. This is illustrative of just where things are at. The total budget that they were proposing and looking at was this $353 million. That's a reduction overall of 42%, which is eye-watering for any of you who have ever tried to set budgets. And looking at the jurisdictional conferences, that's looking at a 43% reduction there, and our central conferences a 10% reduction. There are other illustrations out there of our finances, but there are a number of reasons as to why we are looking at these major slashes to our budgets. Some of those start way back in 2020 with just sort of a slowdown in giving and a slowdown in contributions towards these special and specific funds. As churches were just doing the work of surviving in those days of the COVID pandemic. But then also over the last couple of years, the swathe of disaffiliations that has taken place, particularly in the United States churches, also has led us to this place of having to make some drastic changes to our budgeting. Basically, folks, I mean, if we look across the board at those disaffiliations, it does have an impact on our life together, and that ultimately is going to have to be reflected in the budget that we're talking about. Now, Jessica, you and I were talking before our meeting tonight, and you said that you were listening into one of our meetings from earlier on today, and you had some comments to make about that. Do you want to add anything to what I've said?
Sure. I mean, I just think you've really hit it on the head. I will point out just a couple of things. Those 10% reductions and the 43% reductions, those aren't like across the board. They are actually targeted to specific programs, specific ministries. There are certain ministries that will be completely defunded just because we have to shift funds to something that's a little more critical. And so just as you're thinking, oh, the jurisdictional conferences got a 43% reduction and the central conferences only got 10. Well, not really. Like, I mean, it's really targeted, so it's good. It's very sobering to see. And the mood today, people, delegates, the delegations from around the world, you could feel it. I would obviously have been very connected and talking, and they're telling me in the room, it was sobering. But at the same time, it's not the end of the United Methodist Church. Pastor Charlie said it really, really well. No, it's actually a hopeful beginning because we're reprioritizing and really figuring out how to do this work together with these resources that we have now. So.
All right. Thank you for that, Jessica. So Jessica, help us a little bit. I teach so many classes on Wednesdays that I really haven't had time to jump online and pay attention to the sessions that have been ongoing today. Are there any, what's the mood of the conference? I know I've heard some of the opening comments about opening worship yesterday was that it was a very hope-filled gathering, much more so than it has been in recent general conferences. And then I've also heard just a couple of whispers on social media that there's been, even though there's been this sobering budget talk, there's also been some signs of hope today. Is there anything you would share with us?
Absolutely. Yeah, the yesterday was opening session. Bishop Tom Bickerton, who is the current president of the Council of Bishops, gave the opening address, and it was just a hope-filled, joyful expression of of United Methodism, what it means to be UMC, and what it might look like to be in the UMC in the future. Absolutely. If you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend that
Hey, let
you.
me let me jump in, Jessica, and just ask Carrie Mack if she could maybe get a link to that and drop it in our social media or in the chat That would be really helpful.
Yeah. And you also can watch the sessions. These are all it's all being live streamed. And they are backing them up, or saving them so that you can watch them later. But I do recommend that you watch that. It was just so joyful and hope-filled. And that's been the mood of the delegations from all over. Everyone seems to be so excited, and there a lot of this has to do with we've been working together, not just in the Florida delegation, not just in the Southeast jurisdiction. We've been working globally. With people from around the world for 5 years now, right? So these are friends that some of us have never met in person, but we feel so close and so tight knit with them. Today so yesterday was a lot of orientation and that opening plenary session. Today we opened with an Episcopal address by Bishop Holston, and then we moved into the Young People's Address, which was actually kicked off by our very own Alejandra Salemi. She was part of the Florida delegation. She actually stepped back because she is now a doctoral student at Duke University. She was before that she got her DMin from I'm sorry, her MDiv at Harvard, and before that, she got her Master's of Public Health at the University of Florida. So she obviously didn't. She is in a new point in her life where she had to step back, but she was invited to give the Young People's Address 5 years ago. So she still gave that Young People's Address today, along with a gentleman from the Congo. The Congo conference as well, the Africa Congo. Um, anyway, so she shared a hopeful, joyful message as well as one of just what it means to be a young person in the UMC, what it means to be a young person in the world, what it means to be a young person in the UMC. Also invite you to watch that if you have time. It was only about 15 minutes. Wonderful use of time. Both addresses were wonderful. I did say in a group chat that if they had been sermons in the boom process in the Board of Ordained Ministry, it would have been an immediate pass. It was wonderful. And then today was the first day that our legislative committees met. So as Pastor Charlie said, every member of the delegation sits on a legislative committee to sort of to vet legislation, propose legislation, um, combine, streamline, do what they need to do before they send it on to the floor to be voted on. Um, we had some really very, very cool stuff happen today with our Florida delegation. So each of those committees has a chair. And we actually have a little over a quarter, 25% of the leadership is actually from the Florida delegation. It is wild to think that that happened. Dr. Judith Pierre Okerson, Reverend Alex Shanks, Molly McIntyre, uh, Esther Rodriguez, Carlene Fogelmiller, all elected to leadership positions. I believe everyone except Carlene is actually chairing their committee or their subcommittee. And then Carlene is actually acting as a secretary for the higher ed and superintendency, the committee on that. So that is huge as far as the leadership, especially from Florida. It's really wonderful to have so many leaders, and it feels great to have such dedicated folks who've been working for so long to make a difference and to really dig into what is happening now at General Conference and what it means for the future of the UMC. So that's the story so far. Tomorrow they'll be back in their legislative sessions. There's always opening worship. There's always an opening plenary. It's a lot of business, but you also get some really cool reports. If you've ever watched annual conference or been to annual conference, very similar. Fewer skits, which I lamented a little bit, but that's all right. And so it's been really positive. The worship itself is beautiful. We're getting music. We sang today in four different languages. We worshiped in 4 or 5 different languages. It has been absolutely beautiful to see the connection. And even watching it from here, it's so wonderful. I can't wait to be there in Charlotte on Sunday, in the room with everyone, but I'm feeling it just sitting here and getting, in our group messaging for the delegation. So
Jessica, thank you for that. Really, really appreciate your input and all the work that you've been doing for these last 4 or 5 years now. How you've stayed on top of it with everything else in your life, including bringing a couple of twins into the world. I do not know how you do it. So thank you for that. I'm going to try and get myself out of this presentation. This card and come back into the room. Okay. So that is the briefest of brief overviews of what General Conference is and how General Conference does its work, and what kind of work that takes place there. I hope that that is a good overview for you. I hope that you've been able to take in the information. And as I said, we're recording this session, so anybody that wants to watch it back, they can come back and look at it. And if you do want access to those infographics that we worked through, you can grab those. You'll find those online, or you can get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to send those over to you. We're now at 6:38, and I would love to open up and really just take some time for any questions about anything that we've said so far. Any questions that we have about the work of General Conference. And as we sort of use that hands up feature or else type it in there, I'm going to come straight to Bill Dunlop because I see his hand up immediately. And if you'll unmute yourself, Bill, and ask whatever question you have.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Just a couple of questions, if I can. I noticed that the United States is divided into 4 areas.
Mm-hmm.
Question is, what determines those 4 different areas? Is it the number of churches or the number of members, or is it arbitrary? Just curiosity.
Yeah, I think hold on. My understanding of that, Bill, is that we're geographically divided into those jurisdictions, and it's not based on numbers, and there are 6 of them, Jessica. 6 jurisdictions in the United States, and those are all geographical as opposed to numerical advantages or anything like that. There's no strict formula except a geographical one.
Okay. My second question was, the overall budget has been reduced. Has that done anything to affect our annual apportionment?
As far as I understand, Jessica, you can help me out here if I make any mistakes. As far as I understand, the primary purpose of the reduction of the budgets is to do the best work possible to keep money in local churches and not raise apportionments. Our Florida conference has already been working on that, and our apportionments came down between 23 and 24. And the work of the General Conference is, again, another attempt to not raise those apportionments and to keep those lower. And so that's why the drastic budget cuts are being swallowed up by conference offices and ministries that will no longer continue, so that this is not passed on to local churches in terms of apportionment numbers. Jessica, would you add anything?
No, you nailed it. And I guess the one thing I would add is that in the presentation today, the presiding bishop over that committee basically said, we make disciples in the local church, and that's where we want to keep those resources. So they're doing that work with that intention.
Bill, does that answer your question?
That answers that question, yes, sir. I just have one other little comment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll hear it. Come on.
If I understood what Jessica was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
Under the regionalization part,
Yeah.
it sounded like the whole conference approves whatever changes to the book of discipline, but then it sounded like it's okay for the different areas to disapprove that or change that to suit whatever they want. Is that correct?
I think you might have a little misunderstanding there, Bill. And let me just go through it. So if the regionalization takes place, there will be a book of discipline that will apply to all of the regions of the church. but there will be a section of that book for each region in which they can contextualize their own ministries and their own legislation for those local regions. I think where you might have been confused is just how that's passed. So if a region makes a change to its contextual discipline, that is up to the region. That does not have to be agreed by the other regions. That's the regionalization is to give each of these regions its own sort of contextual ability to make changes that would not impact another region. Does that answer your query? Did I make that clear?
And that's every region, like Africa will do theirs, and
Yeah.
South Florida will do theirs, and
So no, it wouldn't be conferences. So it would be regions. So the United States would become a region with this change, correct, Jessica?
okay.
And so the United States, there would be an opportunity at a general conference to change, or a regional conference, I presume, to change some of the discipline that would apply to the United States. But that change would not then apply to Africa. And vice versa. Africa could make a change to its contextual discipline that would not then apply to the United States.
And one of the things that gets changed, just so you know, and this was also an example in the presentation today. Right now, the central conferences vote on retirements for United States bishops and clergy and their retirement accounts and things like that. And they don't want to vote on those things. It doesn't affect them. And they're just it's part of the budget that they would. And so that would be something that we could move into a regional area. So like a central conference could have, oversee its own retirement or whatever it is that they do specifically for those clergy, those staff. And the United States wouldn't be voting on the Philippines, and the Philippines wouldn't be voting on, Germany, and it would be a little more fair, right? Because we don't want to be in each other's business like that. That's it just feels wrong. So that was one of the examples.
All right.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, Bill, thank you. The next hand that I saw go up was Tommy and Anita, then Jean, and then I see a written question from Jennifer and Jeff. So we'll take them in that order. So Tommy and Anita, I don't know which one of you has the question.
Glow has her hand up too, so put her at that list.
And Glow, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Charlie, really just follow on to what you just mentioned. At the ultimate, could the U.S. region essentially write their entire book of discipline, or are there only certain sections that they could interpret differently?
Yeah, it's the second one, Tommy. So what I said there was there would be a book of discipline that would apply to all of the regions, and then there would be a section, for example, for the United States Church, a section for the African Church, a section for the Philippines, for Western Europe. That's the idea.
Who's going to put that together?
Jessica. Not Jessica. Jessica's going to answer the question.
It's me. No, I'm kidding. We're Methodists. We do things by committee. So there would be a committee on the book of. Currently, we have a committee on the book of discipline. We would have a regional committee on the book of discipline rather than a global committee or general committee on the book of discipline. So those would again be elected leaders. People, just the people who do it now are elected officials. They are elected again in their annual conferences in their jurisdictions to the general conference. So it would be the same thing.
Okay. And Charlie, I got one quick follow on the issue of fundamentally a 40% cut in budget. Is there anything within that that's held constant and not cut? Are we talking about dropping administrative staff by 40%, missions by 40%? What are the general parameters around that?
So, Tommy, I'm going to pass to Jessica, who might have some more specific information on that. But my understanding is that it is not a 40+% across the board from every budget line. There are whole programs that are cut, so that other programs can be protected. But Jessica, maybe you can answer some better than that.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit it on the head without getting way down in the weeds. And I couldn't get down in the weeds because, as you can imagine, it's a very large budget with a lot of programs and ministries in it. So I couldn't name every single ministry, and how much, or if it's being 100% cut, or if it's only being losing 10% of its funding. You can find the budget that is passed. Now, this budget is not technically passed, right? Like all of that gets voted
Yeah.
on next week, whenever we're in. But these are the proposed budgets, right? And once those go through, it's actually in the records. There's a daily record that's put out. And so tomorrow, I think it's usually by noon, they'll have an accounting and a record. It goes up on that General Conference website that Carrie Mack, I believe, linked it earlier. And you can certainly go dig in there and find it. I have not, just I haven't had time to do that, quite honestly. But if you would like to go dig in there and see exactly what it is, as Pastor Charlie said, it is not 40% across the board. It is, it could be 100% of one budget. It could be 5% of another budget. It could be 0% of another budget. So, it really is kind of spread out. And they've been very thoughtful about that, trying to figure out what are the critical needs. It may mean a reduction in staff for some administrative offices. It may mean nothing. I know that there are youth programs, not youth, young clergy programs that are being fully cut, which is sad, but also it's a place where we can make a cut that hopefully we can come back and fund later.
I'll
So
say in particular for the Young Clergy Initiative, that was a fund that had a sunrise and a sunset.
it did.
It was scheduled to be cut at this time. So it's not
No.
a cut as in I'm trying to make a hole in the budget. So
Yeah,
No,
Charlie,
no. It
do
was
you have
definitely. Go ahead.
do you have a practical feeling of what that means to us here in Fernandina?
Here in Fernandina, it's business as usual, Tommy. We continue to pay our apportionments at 100%, and we continue to do our best to play our part in helping out the Florida Conference and helping out the central offices. In terms of the Florida Conference, that's probably where we'll see more of a change. And so at our annual conference this year, we're going to be voting on cutting the number of districts in Florida down from 8 to 6. The Northeast District will swallow up other regions and will become a much bigger district. And so that there's going to be some savings at the conference level. And that's really, again, what I said at the start of this conversation. The whole attempt is to keep funds in the local church for local ministry. Bishop Berlin is very committed to that. I'm sure he has been a lead voice in the Council of Bishops in terms of making sure the General Conference is trying its best to do that as well. So for us here at Fernandina, Tommy, I say business as usual. We're in a good state of health, and we get to continue playing a role in the life of the conference the way we do. Does that answer?
Yep, thanks.
You got it. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take Jennifer Wild's question from the chat, simply because it's a pretty simple one to answer. She asks, what if a state conference votes no on changes? So first of all, we're not state conferences, even though we call ourselves the Florida Conference. West of Tallahassee is not in the Florida Conference. So we are an annual conference. And what if an annual conference votes no on changes? We go back to those infographics, we can see that it needs a 2/3 aggregate of all votes across all conferences to become legislation. So if an annual conference says no at 100%, but they still reach that 2/3 majority, that change to the Constitution will go through anyway, regardless of what the annual conference said. Does that make sense, Jennifer? All right, thank you. I told you that was an easy one. All right, Jean Robinson.
I was just wondering if the budget cuts are going to affect the campus ministry.
Okay, I think we can speak to that. I'm going to mute you, Jean, because your microphone is making some noise there. I'm going to speak to that and say, are the budget cuts impacting campus ministry? Yes, is the short answer to that. And not all campus ministries. Some of the larger campus ministries in Florida will continue to be funded. But some of the other campus ministries in Florida will cease to be funded in the way that they have been. Campus to City Wesley is going to face those changes. We are in a position though where our district funds are healthy enough to continue funding the campus ministry for the next number of years. And we are going to be, as a district, working out what it is to help supplement those funds to keep the campus ministry going. So local churches will be asked to do that. Your own church, Memorial, we made a significant gift out of our surplus funds from 2023 to Campus to City Wesley this year. That was worth $20,000, and it was sent to them because we knew this was coming, and because we know the vital nature of campus ministry and connecting with students. So I was really proud as a senior pastor that our finance committee made that decision together, and the Campus to City Wesley group were very thankful for that gift. I am going to come to our next question. Jean asked hers. Let's get to Jeff Miller. Then we're going to come to Steve and Jack. I see your hand up as well. And Glow is before Steve because, so Jeff Miller, since the United Methodist Conference started in 1968, there have been 2 specific sessions covering 2 specific topics. Can you share what were the topics? Jeff, if you're able to jump on the microphone and just help me understand that question a little bit better, it would be helpful for me.
He says no mic.
Oh, he's got no mic. Oh, okay. So Jeff, I'm gonna respond to your question just from what I'm understanding as I read it, and I hope that I get a part of what you're looking for. So I don't know what the 2 specific sessions are, but actually since 1978 there has been a general conference every 4 years that has met in various places throughout time. Of course, there has been a special session called in 2019. I'm not aware of special session being called before that. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. In 2019, the specific topic was that of human sexuality, and there was a vote on how to proceed around the divisions that had been in place since the adjustment to the Book of Discipline in 1972. Out of that 2019 conference came what was known as the traditional plan, and then at the end of 2019, there was a protocol put forward as a means of finding a better way forward than what the traditional plan had been when it was voted in. Then COVID happened, the protocol fell apart, the GMC started, disaffiliations happened, and that's where we find ourselves today. So I don't know, Jeff, maybe we can take the conversation offline and you can grab me on Sunday and we can follow up a little bit on this, but I don't know what the specific sessions and the specific topics exactly are referring to outside of 2019 and human sexuality. All right. And next on my list is going to be Glow, because she's been waiting patiently.
I have a couple of things. One is maybe, Jessica, you can help answer this a little better. Pros and cons of regionalization. It seems to be a movement forward in the right direction. My questions are surrounding that are, will this technically, even though we still have the Book of Discipline for everybody, will it give each region a little more autonomy?
Go ahead,
I mean,
Jessica.
yeah, in a word, yes. Think of it more of contextualization, right? That's really it. It'll allow each ministry to contextualize what works for their specific ministry setting, right? Because what works, we can see this within the Southeast jurisdiction. We can see this within, I will make a comparison here. Memorial is a suburban church. So what works here is great, but it might not, like the sermon styles that Pastor Charlie works. There are illustrations that are going to work here versus what might work in a rural setting. Like I give the example of this local church. There's a small church in South Georgia that my great like founded it was United Methodist Church, and their pastor is a chicken farmer, and the illustrations that he uses are a lot about farming because that's what his community. If you think about it in that way, in that illustration, it is just making it so that your setting, your ministry setting, is taken into consideration, based on laws, based on all kinds of things, right? So, that's really what it is. Think of it as more of context, putting things in context or ministry setting. Charlie, would you add something to that?
I mean, no, that's pretty much it. It's giving the regions, the world in general changes at a very fast pace, but it changes in different ways in different places. And regionalization gives the United Methodist Church an opportunity to respond to a changing world around it in the various contexts that it finds itself in. That's
Okay.
what I would say, Glo.
Does it present, is there any way it could possibly present a challenge for these regions then to break off into their own organization altogether?
So I would imagine that the what we talked about all along here, there is a book of discipline that has exit ramps in existence for churches, conferences, and those already exist. And I would imagine that regions would only be able to exit if they were in compliance with that general book of discipline. And that is what I would say. So I would say those off ramps will not be created by regionalization. But the off ramps that exist will still be there.
Okay. Now I have one other question, and it's actually about the Book of Discipline.
Okay.
Jessica, you said that the social principles part, is that what the part? Anyway, the part that is being requested to be changed is to take out hurtful language. So going to take out banning this and banning that. But how did it read prior to 1972? Because I'm not privy to that.
It didn't say specifically. It said, was being in a marriage, but it wasn't a sexual activity outside of marriage. I can't remember the exact. Charlie, do you remember the exact wording from before 19?
I wasn't even born in
I was going to
1968.
say he was
so
too young.
Neither was I. I wasn't. I also wasn't born. But it did not specify. The 1972 language is added to specify homosexuality.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
singled it out. So.
And I think we
Okay.
can find that out for you, Glo, and
Yeah.
That's
get that
okay.
information
That's
for you.
what I really wanted to know, was whether it was not until 1972 that it actually got spelled out as one
That's
issue.
right. That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Steve Fife, you're next on my list, and then I'm coming to Jack. And if anybody else needs to raise a hand, now's a good time to do it. Carrie Mack's going to be scarring the screen for us.
Okay, my question is, everything is to this leading up to this conference is in the Book of Discipline. To be in the Book of Discipline, it all has to have 2/3 votes all the way across the board. A lot of, So my question is that when was the vote for regionalization conducted?
So the vote for, are you talking about how the United Methodist Church was constituted in 1968 with the central conferences, Steve?
No, I just want to know whose idea was the this regionalization, and who, voted on it. I didn't hear anything about it till all of a sudden, Zoom. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, so it's not what we're doing. It's one of the things that has been brought before the conference and is
Okay.
currently being discussed by the conference. I would say Jessica can help me out on this, but certainly the idea of regionalization has been in the background of these conversations, particularly since like Tampa 2012, the General Conference then, and into 2016 and 19, as people have tried to find solutions in a changing world. This has been on the radar. Now,
Yeah.
where it comes from to us in recent, I guess, months or weeks is certainly for the American delegations have certainly had a favor towards regionalization as a solution to our problem as United Methodists. But there has also been broad consensus from the central conferences in Africa and from some of the central conferences in Europe, because they also recognize that this is a way that they get to conduct their own business too, without having to bring it to a sort of Western heavy general conference every 4 years. So that's really where we come at. It's been on the radar for a while, but it's really taken us to get to where we are now, for this to become a possibility, Steve. And we'll see what plays out over the coming couple of weeks. But as I said in our presentation, it's a constitutional change which requires an awful lot of approval from an awful lot of the world. And so it's by no means signed, sealed, and delivered at all. But it is certainly a conversation that has been put forward and recommended with a broad consensus. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yes, it does. But what you're telling me is it hasn't been implemented yet.
No, definitely not.
Okay. All
The
right.
General Conference is the only place that it can be implemented, and it has not sat together since the special agenda item of 2019. It hadn't had a General Conference since 2016. So this has been the first opportunity since 16 to actually conduct this kind of business.
Okay. Follow on question. When you have the
Oh.
Book of Discipline, that's like the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
Well, so far, from what I've seen, the law has been broken, to put it bluntly, and be right on. Who polices this? It doesn't seem that there's been any policing of the Book of Discipline, so why even bother with it?
So there has been policing of it, and you don't see an awful lot of it. Complaints are made. If you had a complaint about me, you could take that to the district superintendent, who I assume would then bring it to the conference committee that would hear that complaint. And if it was to be fought, all the way through, that would eventually come to what we call our judicial council, who would make a ruling on any complaints. So complaints are very much policed, Steve. I'll say that. Now, at exactly the same time, I will say that there are other places where there have been violations of the Book of Discipline, and they have been allowed to be swept under the carpet, or they have been ignored. And ultimately, that is coming down to the different positions that various people have on various items of our discipline. It would be great, wouldn't it be great if every single element of law enforcement in our world was equally meted out all the time. But I think if we're all real with ourselves, we can say that does not happen. And so what we have and what becomes famous are the places where there are seeming violations, of course, but do not let that make you think that our Book of Discipline is not enforced and we are not held to account on it. We certainly are. And I know I am. And every annual conference, I have to stand up and say that to the best of my ability, I am living within the discipline. And I'm the only one that I can truly speak for, Steve. So yeah, that's what I would say. Does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. One last question. If there is a split and we go into regions, and each region has we have the Book of Discipline, which is overarching, and then you have regional. So we have United States. Well, the United States is very large. Will that be broken down into sections and then individual books written for those that come under it seems to be interesting.
No, Steve, I would not say that. There will be a United States region, and there will be, I assume, a regional conference that would make decisions for the United States region. And then annual conferences then come in line with that Book of Discipline. Annual conferences cannot just sort of go off and do their own thing by and large. That's not saying that might not happen, because someone might lead in a certain direction, but by and large, they cannot go off in their own direction. And it's important to say that.
Okay, thank you very much.
You got it, Steve. You got it. Jack, you've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, comment and a question. The comment on regionalization, pardon the phrasing, but it sounds like separate but equal programs. My question is, the region or the district is reducing, has a fund reduction like the 43 or 10%, but we will still be paying the same apportionment. Is that correct?
So we will continue to pay apportionments as they are calculated at our conference level, and they are always calculated on a number of factors, but primarily they are calculated on the dollars that the local church brings in, and that is the heftiest part of the equation there. We will pay apportionments on a very similar formula, Jack, and like I've said a couple of times already. The hope is that apportionments either come down or they stay at the level. They did come down between last year's payment and this year's payment, and I know that Bishop Berlin continues to want that to be the case for local churches, so that local dollars stay in local communities for local ministry. They have held true to that promise, even with broad swathing cuts to our annual conference budget for this year. They have stayed true to that, and I hope that they will continue to.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. All right, Herman, you're it.
So thanks a bunch for this kind of org chart exposure to to things. Gives me a great picture of what we're looking at as far as the organization, as well as the control, the mechanisms that are in the background. My question is, as a casual observer, all right, not daily engaged in any of these things. As a casual observer, what can I do? What's my part?
So that's a really good question. What can all of us do in local churches that do not have a part to play in the actual decision making at General Conference? So the first thing that I would say is pray for the delegates and pray for the General Conference. And Carrie Mack, can you bring up the link to the board with the funny name that I can't remember? What is it, Jessica?
It's the Kudo board.
The Kudo board. That's what I thought it was.
Kudo board.
So Carrie Mack's going to put a link to the Kudo board, and if anybody is so inclined, that is a way that you can send a message to our delegation just to let them know that you're praying for them, thinking about them, and that you're encouraging them in their work. So that's the first thing that I would recommend to you, Herman. The second thing that I would recommend is if any of you have time, get yourselves on and watch one of the plenary sessions. Listen to those sermons. Get to know the wider conference. You know, we talk a lot about Bishop Tom Berlin here because he is our bishop, but Bishop Bickerton yesterday preached a word that was just hot and on it, and it was amazing. And everybody would benefit from going and listening to his sermon. So the link's in the chat there, and I would say that's a really good way to get interested in what's going on in our general conference level. And so staying in touch that way, following the hashtags UMCGC will keep you in touch with what people are saying on a social media level. If you go on the artist formerly known as Twitter, I will warn you that you will see every kind of response to General Conference. It won't all be good, and some of it will be very good. But and you got to use your brain as you interact with that, of course, and you know that, Herman. But those are the primary things that I would say. Become aware, listen in on some of the words that are coming out of it, and stay in touch with the updates day and daily. Bishop Berlin will be posting videos. We'll put those on our social media sites at Memorial here. I'll put them on my personal social media, just so that you can get a little update from Bishop Berlin. He has promised that he would do that throughout the conference. And so as we get those videos, we'll share them. But first and foremost, please pray for these delegates and for all the delegates from across the world, that the Holy Spirit would lead and guide our United Methodist Church into the next chapter that we're moving into. Does that help you, Herman?
Thank you.
You got it. You got it. Okay, I'm coming back now. I have Patty Weedman asked me a question here. With this conference, is there anything specific that you're concerned about or looking at closely to be approved or not approved? Or do you just sit back and take in what's going on over the 10 days as a whole? So Patty, I think the answer to that is I think regionalization is a good thing for our church. I think it is broadly. I think the days of being able to have a global discipline that is the same all the way through, well, I don't even think they've existed. There have always been exceptions for the central conferences on things as well. So I think regionalization is going to even the playing field for us there, and for our regions, and I think it'll be good for the United Methodist Church broadly. I mean, I'm looking closely at all of the things. I'm looking at budget cuts. I'm looking for signs of hope, that the United Methodist Church remembers that we are Easter people and that we love resurrection, and that the last few years have been hard, but that we're seeking to rise up as well. And of course, I'm looking for any changes to our discipline, because they have a direct impact on my day-to-day work, Patty, and what it means for us and what it means for the local church. And I'm also looking at what that would mean on a local church level. And so what I mean by that is, if there were changes to our discipline, for example, the Florida Conference has been really clear. If there were changes to the language around human sexuality, if some of that harmful language was removed, the conference has been clear that that would not force any church into any position, or force any clergy into any position that they did not want to be forced into. And so, putting that really bluntly, if Memorial was a church that was permitted by the discipline to have a same-sex marriage, but as a church did not want to do that, what our conference is telling us is that Memorial would never be pushed into that. And that would be a church decision made by our local churches. And so, again, I take the conference at their word. Some people giggle at me for doing that, but they haven't let me down so far, and I'll stick with them. So, of course, I'm watching all of this with a keen interest. I sit back and take it in, because I don't have a voice up there. I don't have a vote. So I watch as an interested observer from this distance. And I understand fully that what happens at General Conference, even though it might take a while to trickle down to Fernandina Beach, it does have an impact on Fernandina Beach, in terms of being setting the legislation for our local church. So I hope that answers your question, Patty. You can give me a thumbs up if I did all right. So
Yeah. Thank
there
you.
you go. All right, Jean is asking about retirement benefits, etc. They are definitely different regionally, and that is a great example of why regions would be considered. Thank you for that. Steve asks, where are you going to post the replay of this meeting? Carrie Mack, where are we going to post the replay of this meeting? On our YouTube channel?
I just replied. I don't know exactly where we're going to put it yet. Probably on YouTube, but it'll be decided by the time the e-news goes out on Friday.
And there'll be a link in the e-news.
And I will put all the links from this that we talked about in there as well.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions or any hands raised that we have missed, or have we done a real good job in answering some of your queries and making some sense of General Conference? All right. I'm seeing some applause there. I'm going to take that as a positive. So, friends, listen, thank you so much. What I said to Herman, I was saying to every single one of you. The best way to take an interest at General Conference is to watch what you can, take in what you can, and to be people who are praying for your church and for your denomination. The winds of change are blowing in our world. You have to be hiding under a rock not to know that. And the church is doing its best to respond to the world that we are in. So I want to be a part of that. I am extremely hopeful for the future of the United Methodist Church. I want to be right in the middle of working out what our next chapter is, and I hope that Memorial does too, because we are well positioned to do that as a church family. So let's continue praying for one another, praying for our church, and striding into the future that Jesus is calling us to, and we'll have a great time as we do that. Okay? Excellent. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure gathering with you. And everybody take care. We'll see you soon.